House of the Dragon series premiere review. It feels like Game of Thrones is back. And thank God, not in a season 8 way either. It's been 3 years since Game of Thrones and 5 years since its fandom started complaining bitterly about its final seasons. Spin off House of the Dragon, therefore, debuts to less hype than it might have once had, but really could restore our fascination with Westeros. Immediately, its premiere boasts everything that Thrones did well: an overqualified cast of character actors, backstabbing, six positions, and lots of dragons. Yes. The first proposed spin off to Game of Thrones, a Naomi Watts late adventure set in Westeros' distant past, was ultimately scrapped, reportedly because it was too different from the original show. Perhaps as a result, it sometimes feels like there's an element of overcorrection here. It's beautifully rendered. The budget is clearly late season Game of Thrones rather than season 1. And both of the Cornish and Spanish locations and the computer generated dragon flights look magical, but looks and sounds awfully close to its progenitor, down to iconography and locations. That's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to the storytelling, since it's set just far enough in Westeros' past to keep us guessing. But it speaks of a persuasive timidity in Hollywood to take even the most minor of risks. Still, that's admittedly more a criticism of this show's context than its content. Showrunners Ryan G. Candle and Miguel Safanchik work from the relatively bare bones chronicle of George R. Martin's Fire and Blood, a quasi academic account of Targaryen rule that has none of the first person intimacy of A Song of Ice and Fire, but does have loads of backstabbing and a civil war. That source material leaves these showrunners with room to embellish the record and its characters without breaking canon. And already you can feel them stretching the limits of the text, to add heft to these new heroes and villains. As it traditional for Westeros, they are the same people. We return to Westeros at the height of the Targaryen dynasty, some 100 years after its founding and 172 years before Daenerys was born as her family fell. The Seven Kingdoms are as united as they get. Following the long, largely peaceful reign of King Jaehaerys, after a minor succession crisis, his throne passes to amiable Viserys I, Paddy Considine, who just wants everyone to get along. It cannot surprise any viewer to learn that we won't get his wish. Considine's one of the best actors around, adding layers as he goes. From dirty jokes with his counselors to surprisingly tough edge with his family. If he doesn't always look quite at home in log tunics and elaborately carved stone hills. That only adds to the feeling that Viserys is not quite the king Westeros needs. The headbutting around Viserys so far come courtesy of his ambitious hand, Otto Hightower, and wayward brother Prince Daemon. Daemon put in charge of forging a much-needed city watch of King's Landing, has built a brutal private army which Otto not unreasonably sees as a problem. Otto, meanwhile, is trying to wield power that is properly the king's, which Damon not unreasonably also sees as a problem. Damon presents as a psychopath, a degenerate, and a bad sportsman. So, presumably, he will pull a Jaime Lannister and end up everyone's favorite, at least for a time. Smith is already building interesting hints of vulnerability and self-mockery to the younger brother whose loyalty to his king holds just enough, yeah. It's worth nothing that he's the first person we see sit on this Iron Throne, a bigger and more aggressive seed than we've seen before. But if that's foreshadowing, there will be a lot of bloodshed before he returns to it. It's also important to keep an eye on teenage France Rhaenyra Targaryen, Millie O'Clock here, soon to be played as an adult by Emma Darcy, and Elysian Hightower, Emily Carey, soon Olivia Cook, the daughters of the king and Hand, respectively, look at times like a romantic couple. But Rhaenyra also flirts with her uncle Daemon, and Elysian is pushed into the king's path by her father. Things Anne and Mary Boleyn and their ambitious father Thomas for a historical parallel. Both Alcock and Carey are excellent and show enough friendship, at least chemistry, that you worry for their future relations. The king is the most interesting character, if the least showy. Considine Viserys gently teases her daughter and tenderly buoys his heavily pregnant wife, Aemma, who is also his cousin, played by Saint Brooke, in between drinking like a fish and telling dirty jokes. He's avoiding military action against aggressive pirates, indulging his wayward brother, and spinning all his hopes of an heir on his possibly forthcoming son. Aemma tells him that this difficult pregnancy will be her last, to his obvious discomfort, and a decision he makes later on adds a darker and more ruthless shade to the initially likable king. In such moments, the show establishes a feminist undercurrent, with the Targaryen woman visibly straining against the practical limits of Westeros society, and Viserys, who has directly benefited from that sexism, is slow to notice such blind spots, and complexity makes the character worthy of Considine time, and should make the power struggles around him less predictable. Beyond the Central family and council, other great noble houses have already been introduced. There is a nod here to be Baratheons, the distant Starks, and to Dorne, and major players will include Bill Patterson's Lord Busby, Master of Coin, and particularly Stephen Townsend's Stricken, Corlys Velaryon. Well, that's pretty much everything for now. Let's see you next video.